The ache began, as it always did, as a dull throb behind her ribs, a phantom limb of a heart she was sure Amelia had unknowingly amputated years ago. Clara had become a connoisseur of this specific brand of pain, an expert in the quiet suffering that came from being the keeper of her best friend's secrets, especially the secrets that involved a man who was not her. For 2 years, 7 months, and 3 days, she had loved Amelia with a ferocity that felt elemental, a truth as solid and unchangeable as the ground beneath her feet. And for that same amount of time, she had perfected the art of the supportive smile, the gentle nod, the carefully neutral advice. She was a ghost in the landscape of her own life, haunting the periphery of Amelia's vibrant, chaotic world. "He just doesn't listen," Amelia said, her voice a fragile thread over the phone. The sigh that followed was heavy with the weight of 1,000 similar conversations. "It's like I'm speaking a different language, Clara. I'm talking about wanting to feel connected, about needing to know he sees me, and he offers to buy me things. He booked a weekend trip to a spa. As if a massage can fix the Grand Canyon-sized gap between us." Clara pressed the phone closer to her ear, the plastic cool against her skin. She pictured Amelia on the other end, probably pacing the chic, impersonal apartment she shared with Mark. She would be chewing on her lower lip, a habit she had when she was frustrated, her brow furrowed. The image was so clear, so painfully dear, that it was a physical blow. "I'm sorry, Ams," she murmured, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. They were the same words she always said. They were safe. They were meaningless. What am I supposed to do? The question was a plea. And here it was, the moment where the knife always twisted. Clara, who would have mapped constellations in Amelia's honor, who knew the precise shade of gold that flecked her brown eyes when she laughed, who understood the intricate symphony of her moods, was once again being asked for directions to a country she was not allowed to enter. She was the cartographer of Amelia's heart, tasked with drawing a map for another man to follow. "Have you told him that?" "Exactly like you told me." Clara's voice was steady, a practiced calm she wore like armor. Another sigh. 100 times. "It just doesn't land. It's like he hears the words, but not the music. He's a good man, I know he is. He's kind, he's stable. He's just not," she trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "He's not me," Clara's heart screamed into the silence. "He's not what you need," Clara finished for her, her tone gentle. It was the closest she could get to the truth. There was a pause, a stretching silence that felt significant. "No," Amelia whispered, her voice cracking. "He's not." That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, a space that felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. It was her haven from the world, but it was also the lonely container for a love that had nowhere to go. She had built her life around the negative space left by Amelia. Her weekends were open, just in case Amelia needed her after a fight with Mark. Her advice was always filtered through a complex algorithm of what would genuinely help Amelia, while simultaneously protecting her own fragile heart. It was an exhausting, impossible calculus. She was living a half-life, and the worst part, the most profoundly ironic part, was that Amelia saw her as the strongest person she knew. The call came just after midnight 2 weeks later. It wasn't a ring, but the frantic, desperate buzzing of the intercom. Clara's heart vaulted into her throat, a wild bird beating against her ribs. It could only be one person. She stumbled out of bed, her bare feet cold on the hardwood floor, and fumbled with the button. "Hello, Clara? It's me. Can I come up?" Amelia's voice was broken, waterlogged with tears. Of course, the words were out of her mouth before she'd even finished processing the request. She buzzed her in and unlocked her apartment door, her hands trembling. When Amelia appeared at the top of the stairs, she looked like a beautiful ruin. Her mascara was smeared in dark rivers down her cheeks, her hair was a tangled mess, and she was clutching a single, overflowing tote bag as if it were a life raft. She wore one of Mark's old, ridiculously large sweatshirts, which only served to make her look smaller, more vulnerable. Clara's carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms, and Amelia fell into them, collapsing against her with a sob that seemed to tear through her entire body. Clara held her, her own breath catching in her throat, inhaling the familiar scent of vanilla and rain and Amelia, a perfume that was woven into the very fabric of her soul. "It's over," Amelia wept into her shoulder. "I did it. I ended it. I couldn't pretend anymore." Clara just held her tighter, stroking her hair, murmuring soft, soothing sounds. This was her role. The comforter. The steady rock. But tonight, something felt different. The line between friendship and the thing she was hiding had never felt so thin, so dangerously permeable. After what felt like an eternity, the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. Amelia pulled back, her eyes red and swollen, her face a mess of tear tracks and raw emotion. She looked at Clara, a profound, searching look that seemed to see past the carefully maintained facade. "I didn't know where else to go," Amelia whispered, her voice hoarse. "As soon as I walked out, the only thing I could think was that I needed to be here. With you." She swiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. You're my safe space, Clara." The words hit Clara with the force of a physical impact. A safe space. It was everything she had ever wanted to be for Amelia, and yet, it felt like a brand, marking her forever as a platonic haven, a protected harbor where Amelia could shelter from romantic storms before sailing off again. The ache behind her ribs flared, sharp and hot. She forced a small, wobbly smile. Her own heart was breaking for 100 different reasons, but Amelia's was the one that was actively bleeding on her floor. "Always," she said, her voice softer than she intended. And then the world tilted on its axis. A faint blush, a delicate pink, crept up Amelia's neck, dusting her tear-stained cheeks. Her gaze dropped from Clara's eyes to her mouth, just for a second, a flicker of movement so brief Clara thought she might have imagined it. But she hadn't. Amelia's breath hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. She looked flustered, confused, like she'd just been caught in a thought she didn't understand. The air in the hallway crackled with a new, unspoken electricity. The world had shifted, a tectonic plate moving deep beneath the surface of their friendship, and neither of them knew what new continent might be born from the upheaval. "Can I?" Amelia's voice was barely a whisper now, her eyes wide and uncertain. "Can I stay here tonight?" Clara's heart hammered a frantic, terrified, hopeful rhythm against her ribs. "Of course," she said, her voice miraculously steady. "You can stay as long as you need." The days that followed blurred into a strange, new reality. Amelia didn't just stay the night. She moved into Clara's spare room, her life decanting from a few boxes she retrieved from her old apartment while Mark was at work. The space, once an office filled with Clara's architectural drafts and lonely ambitions, was now softened by Amelia's presence. Her clothes were draped over the chair, her favorite lavender-scented candles sat on the nightstand, and the scent of her shampoo lingered in the bathroom long after she'd showered. Clara's apartment, once a silent refuge, was now filled with sound. With life. It was a dangerous, intoxicating paradise. Their evenings fell into a quiet rhythm. They would cook dinner together, a clumsy but comforting dance in the small kitchen, their shoulders brushing, their hands grazing as they reached for the same spice. Then they would migrate to the couch, a glass of wine in hand, the television murmuring in the background ignored. It was in the blue-gray light of the television that the real conversations happened. "I feel like I've been playing a role for the last 3 years," Amelia confessed one night, swirling the red wine in her glass. She was curled at the other end of the couch, her feet tucked beneath her. The perfect girlfriend. The one who is understanding and low maintenance. The one who doesn't ask for too much. But it was a performance. And I think I was the only one in the audience who didn't know it was an act. "What do you think you were missing?" Clara asked, her voice soft. She kept her body very still, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile intimacy of the moment. Amelia was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. "Everything," she finally whispered. "The little things. Someone knowing I hate the sound of styrofoam without me having to say it. Someone who knows I only drink tea when I'm sad. Someone who feels like home. I thought that's what love was supposed to be. Not a performance. Not a negotiation. Just a feeling of being home. I know you hate styrofoam, Clara thought, the words a silent shout in her mind. I know you drink Earl Grey with a splash of milk when you're sad and chamomile when you're just tired. I know you. The knowledge was a lead weight in her stomach. As the weeks passed, the space between them on the couch began to shrink. It started with a knee brushing against another, a touch that lingered instead of recoiling. Then one night, exhausted and emotionally raw after a difficult phone call with her mother, Amelia had laid her head in Clara's lap without asking. Time had stopped. Clara's entire being focused on the warm, heavy weight of Amelia's head, the soft strands of her hair against her thigh. Hesitantly, every nerve ending screaming, Clara had lifted her hand and began to gently stroke her hair. Amelia had sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated contentment, and melted further into her touch. It became their new normal. Movie nights were no longer on opposite ends of the sofa, but with Amelia's head in Clara's lap, Clara's fingers idly tracing patterns through her hair or along her arm. The touches were innocent, born of comfort and familiarity, yet for Clara, they were electric, a slow and exquisite torture. Each brush of skin was a question she couldn't answer, a hope she was terrified to entertain. She started noticing things. The way Amelia's breathing would deepen when Clara's fingers traced the delicate skin of her wrist. The way her eyes, when she looked up from her lap, seemed softer, more vulnerable than ever before. And then there was the looking. It happened more and more frequently. In the middle of a conversation, Amelia's gaze would drop, just for a beat, to Clara's mouth. The first time, Clara dismissed it. The second, her heart stuttered. By the fifth, it was an undeniable fact, a terrifying, thrilling piece of data she didn't know how to process. What did it mean? Was she projecting her own desperate longing onto her friend? Was she seeing what she wanted to see? The not knowing was a hurricane in her chest. One Saturday, they were sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by takeout containers and a bottle of wine, attempting to build a ridiculously complex piece of IKEA furniture for the spare room. They were laughing, their faces smudged with dust, when Amelia had looked up, her eyes bright with mirth. "You have a little something," Amelia said, her voice trailing off as she reached out. Her thumb brushed against the corner of Clara's mouth, gentle and warm. The world stopped spinning. The laughter died in Clara's throat. All she could feel was the soft pad of Amelia's thumb against her skin, a point of heat that radiated through her entire body. Amelia's smile faltered, her expression shifting into something else, something uncertain and intense. Her eyes searched Clara's, and her gaze, once again, dropped to her lips. It lingered there this time, a silent, weighty question hanging in the air between them. Amelia's hand trembled slightly. She pulled it back as if she'd been burned, her cheeks flushing a deep, telltale pink. "Sorry," she mumbled, looking away, suddenly intensely interested in a Swedish-engineered screw. There was just dust. But it wasn't just dust. Clara knew it. And in the way Amelia refused to meet her eyes for the next 10 minutes, she knew Amelia knew it too. A line had been crossed. It hadn't been a deliberate step, but a slow, unconscious drift, and now they were on the other side, in a new and uncharted territory, and the old maps were useless. The fear was a cold knot in Clara's stomach, but beneath it, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to unfurl. The tension grew, a living thing in the small apartment. It was in the charged silence when their hands brushed reaching for the coffee pot in the morning. It was in the way Amelia would watch her, a look of profound, aching confusion on her face when she thought Clara wasn't looking. The easy intimacy of the first few weeks had curdled into a kind of exquisite agony. The head in her lap felt heavier now, freighted with unspoken meaning. The casual touches felt less like comfort and more like a test. Clara, terrified of the hope blooming in her chest, began to retreat. It was a subtle withdrawal. She would sit on a chair instead of the couch. She would find reasons to be busy in her office when Amelia was home. She made her touches briefer, her smiles a little tighter. She was trying to put the lid back on Pandora's box, but it was too late. The ghosts were already out, dancing in the space between them. She was protecting herself, rebuilding the walls that Amelia's vulnerability had dismantled. If she let herself hope, if she let herself believe this was real, the fall would be unsurvivable. Better to live in the familiar ache of longing than in the wreckage of a shattered friendship. She lasted 4 days. On the 4th night, Clara was washing the dishes, her back deliberately to the living room where Amelia was pretending to read a book. She could feel her friend's gaze on her like a physical weight. The silence stretched, taut and thin, until it finally snapped. Clara. Amelia's voice was quiet, but it cut through the sound of the running water. Clara didn't turn around. Yeah, will you look at me? It wasn't a request. Clara's hands froze in the soapy water. Slowly, she turned off the faucet, dried her hands on a towel, and turned to face her. Amelia had put her book down. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a mixture of hurt and determination. What's going on? Amelia asked, her voice trembling slightly. You've been distant. You've been hiding from me for days, and I want to know why. Did I do something? Did I cross a line? Yes, Clara's mind screamed. You crossed every line. You walked into my heart like you own the place, and I don't know how to ask you to leave. I don't want to ask you to leave. No, of course not, Clara said, the lie tasting bitter. I've just been busy. A lot of work. Amelia's eyes filled with tears, and it was like a physical blow. Don't do that, she whispered, shaking her head. Don't lie to me. Not you. We've been living in each other's pockets for 6 weeks. I know when you're busy and I know when you're shutting me out. What aren't you telling me? The directness of the question stole the air from Clara's lungs. There was nowhere to hide. The walls she had so carefully constructed were turning to glass. She could feel the confession, the truth of the last 2 years, 7 months, and now almost 3 weeks, rising in her throat like a tide. She just shook her head, unable to speak, afraid that if she opened her mouth, everything would come spilling out. Amelia stood up and took a hesitant step closer. Is it because of Mark? Are you worried about what this looks like? Clara let out a short, humorless laugh. No, it's not about Mark. Then what is it? Amelia's voice was pleading now. She took another step, closing the distance between them until only a few feet remained. Talk to me, Clara. Please. Amelia's own fear was palpable now, her confusion written all over her beautiful, earnest face. She looked down at her hands, then back up at Clara, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I think I'm the one who crossed a line, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I just didn't realize it until you pulled away. She took a deep, shuddering breath. When I left Mark, I thought I was just sad about the relationship ending. But that's not it. I haven't missed him. Not really. I think I've just been so incredibly lonely for so long, and I didn't even know it. But being here with you, I don't feel lonely. At all. She looked at Clara, her expression one of raw, terrifying vulnerability. And I've been so confused. About everything. About why it feels so right when you touch me. About why I feel more at home sleeping on your lumpy spare bed than I ever did in that king-size bed with him. She took the final step, her socked feet silent on the floorboards. She was so close now Clara could feel the heat radiating from her skin. I've been thinking things I don't understand, Amelia whispered, her gaze flicking down to Clara's mouth and staying there. For weeks. I've been thinking about what it would be like to kiss you. The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile, shimmering thing. It was the most terrifying and beautiful sentence Clara had ever heard. It was the key turning in a lock she thought was rusted shut forever. The hurricane in her chest stilled, replaced by a profound, terrifying calm. The fear was still there, a humming wire in the back of her mind, but the hope, that tiny, fragile seed, bloomed in an instant, a supernova of light and heat. The truth she had been carrying for so long, the heavy, secret weight of it, suddenly felt impossibly light. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was a bridge. Amelia's admission, so hesitant and full of fear, gave Clara the courage she never knew she had. The carefully constructed dam inside her broke, and the words she had swallowed for years finally came pouring out. "You've been thinking about it for weeks?" Clara's voice was a ragged whisper, disbelief and a wild, soaring hope warring within it. A tear she hadn't realized was forming slipped down her cheek. "Amelia, I've been thinking about it for 2 years, 7 months, and 19 days. The specificity of it, the raw, unvarnished truth, landed in the space between them. Amelia's eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent gasp. The confusion on her face didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by something else, a dawning, breathtaking understanding. It was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. The pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know she was solving clicked into place, rearranging the entire picture of their friendship, of her life. "Oh," Amelia breathed, the single word full of wonder and regret and 100 other emotions. "Oh, Clara," another tear escaped her own eye, tracing a path through the faint blush on her cheek. "All this time." Clara could only nod, her throat tight with emotion. The confession was out. The world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. "All this time," she confirmed, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. Amelia reached out, her hand trembling, and cupped Clara's cheek. Her thumb gently wiped away the tear. The touch was not like the others. It wasn't tentative or accidental. It was deliberate. It was an answer. "I'm so stupid," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she searched Clara's eyes. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. How could you?" Clara managed, leaning into her touch, the warmth of her palm a balm on her skin. They stood there for a long moment, caught in the gravity of their new reality, the air crackling with everything that had just been said. The years of silence, the weeks of tension, all of it had coalesced into this single, heart-stopping point in time. Amelia's gaze dropped to Clara's mouth one last time. There was no hesitation in it now. Only a clear, undisguised longing that mirrored Clara's own. "Can I?" Amelia whispered, the question a ghost of breath between them. It wasn't a question about weeks or years. It was a question about now. Clara's world narrowed to the space between their lips. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, a small, jerky movement that conveyed all the terror and yearning and overwhelming relief that was crashing through her. Amelia leaned in slowly, giving Clara every chance to pull away. But Clara didn't move. She met her halfway. The first brush of their lips was impossibly soft, a tentative exploration. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was featherlight and carried the weight of everything they had left unsaid for years. It tasted of salt from their tears and the sweet wine they had shared, but mostly, it tasted of a rightness so profound it made Clara's knees weak. Amelia pulled back a fraction of an inch, her eyes still closed, her forehead resting against Clara's. "Clara," she breathed, her voice full of awe. And then the deepening. The certainty. Amelia's other hand came up to cradle Clara's face, her fingers tangling in the hair at her nape, and she kissed her again. There was no hesitation this time. It was a kiss of discovery, of reclamation. It was urgent and hungry, but achingly tender. It was Amelia learning the shape of her and Clara finally being known. Clara's hands came up to grip Amelia's waist, pulling her closer, closing the last bit of distance between them until there was no space left for doubt or fear. It was a kiss that rewrote history, turning years of quiet pain into the prologue of a new story. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their chests rising and falling in unison. They didn't move, just rested their foreheads together, sharing the same air. The silence in the apartment was no longer tense or heavy. It was filled with a shimmering, peaceful stillness. "Wow," Clara breathed out, the word feeling utterly inadequate. Amelia let out a shaky laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yeah," she whispered. Wow, she opened her eyes, and the golden flecks in them were brighter than Clara had ever seen. That felt like coming home. The words, the very ones Amelia had used to describe what was missing with Mark, settled into Clara's soul. It was a relief so profound it felt like she could finally, after years of holding her breath, exhale. A tremor of fear, a faint aftershock of the seismic shift that had just occurred, ran through Clara. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, not wanting to break the spell. Amelia's hands tightened on her waist, a reassuring pressure. "Me too," she confessed, her own voice shaky but honest. "I'm absolutely, completely terrified. I don't know what this means, or what we do now, or how any of this works." She pulled back just enough to look Clara in the eyes, her expression achingly sincere. "But for the first time in a very long time, I'm not scared of being scared." The paradox made perfect, beautiful sense. A sudden realization dawned on Amelia's face, a look of profound clarity. "Oh my God," she said, her voice full of wonder. "It was always you." Clara furrowed her brow. "What was?" "Everything," Amelia said, a small, incredulous laugh escaping her. "Every fight I had with Mark about not feeling seen. Every time I felt that disconnect, that something was missing. I was measuring him against you. I was measuring every relationship against what I have with you, and they all came up short. I didn't have the right name for it. I didn't understand that the friendship I had with you wasn't the baseline. It was the peak. It was everything." The confession was a final, healing balm on the old wounds of Clara's heart. She hadn't just been a ghost haunting the edges of Amelia's life. She had been the sun around which Amelia's emotional world had secretly orbited. She hadn't been invisible, she had been the entire landscape. "So, what do we do?" Clara asked, the question full of a fragile, nascent hope. Amelia smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes and made them shine. She leaned in and pressed a soft, quick kiss to Clara's lips. "We figure it out," she said simply. "Together. We take it one day at a time. And maybe we build that stupid IKEA cabinet tomorrow." Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like it came from a part of her she thought had long gone dormant. "Okay," she agreed. "Tomorrow." 3 months later, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the soft morning light filtering through her bedroom window. She wasn't alone. Amelia was curled against her side, her breathing deep and even, one arm slung possessively over Clara's waist. The lumpy spare room bed had been dismantled weeks ago, its parts now stored in the attic. The absurdly complicated IKEA cabinet they had eventually built stood proudly in the corner of the living room, a monument to their new beginning. Their life had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural and effortless as breathing. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it had softened, transforming into a kind of gentle reverence for what they were building. They talked for hours, recontextualizing their past, finding new meaning in old memories. They learned to navigate the shift from friends to something more, a process that was sometimes clumsy but always tender, always anchored by the profound rightness of it all. Mark was a resolved memory, a man who had, with surprising grace, accepted the end of his chapter in Amelia's life. Clara carefully slipped out of bed, her movements slow so as not to wake Amelia. She padded into the kitchen and found a fresh mug of coffee waiting for her on the counter, just the way she liked it, a splash of oat milk, no sugar. A small, simple gesture that spoke volumes. It was being known. It was being seen. She leaned against the counter, sipping the warm coffee, and looked around her small apartment. It was no longer a prison or a lonely sanctuary. It was home. It was filled with the lingering scent of lavender and vanilla, with the sound of 2 toothbrushes in the holder, with the comfortable, lived-in mess of a shared life. A pair of arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and a soft kiss was pressed to her shoulder blade. "Morning," Amelia mumbled into her back, her voice thick with sleep. Clara leaned back, melting into the embrace. "Morning." They stood like that for a long moment, swaying gently in the quiet kitchen, the rising sun casting long shadows across the floor. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic pronouncements. There was just this. The quiet, steady, breathtaking reality of it. She understood now. Home wasn't a place with 4 walls. It wasn't a city or a street. It was this quiet, certain space between their intertwined hands. It was the safe harbor she had found in Amelia, and the one Amelia had, against all odds, found in her. She realized that sometimes the most terrifying dares, the ones that ask you to lay your whole heart bare, led to the most beautiful discoveries. It turned out her safe space had been waiting for her all along, too. And she was finally, blessedly, home.